This is the first episode in what will be at least a two-part series. It's called Boomers and Beyond. I'm Connie Barlow. I'm 68 years old, and that makes me both a boomer and, here in America, a full-scale senior. I get all the benefits that are possible: Social Security, Medicare, and Golden Eagle Pass for entering our national parks. Because my husband and I are in rural Northern California right now, well north of San Francisco, I personally have been sheltering in place for well over a month. It was about a week before our governor ordered all non-essential workers and other people to shelter in place. Today is April 17th, 2020. And that's exactly 1 month after I posted what I call a COVID legacy pledge for Boomers and Beyond. That was initially only in text on a webpage I created, and I've been updating it, modifying, editing it ever since. But as of 1 month later, I decided it's time to also put this onto YouTube, where I can also make some commentary and perhaps reach a wider audience of seniors. Just seniors. This is just meant for seniors, especially seniors in America of my ethnicity, where I don't feel underprivileged, to consider what we might want to do in this time of COVID virus should we end up getting it. And that may mean modifying the living will, the advance directives we already have. And so I'm offering here first a background of what I call a COVID legacy pledge. And in part 2 of this series, I'll offer my sample that I have made and am asking my husband to make sure is fulfilled on should I end up having real distress with the COVID virus. In this first episode, I'll be reading just the introductory background section. And that's the place where you'll get an understanding both of my background and why this topic is something, even though I'm not trained in counseling, I'm a retired science writer in evolutionary ecology and rewilding. But why I feel it's important for me to make a statement in this, because I have thought about it a lot, and I'd like other seniors to consider it, especially given some of the things that I've been seeing online. That is full of just pure passive concern for we seniors, as if we can't make some decisions for ourselves to how to be of service during this time. So let's get started. COVID Legacy Pledge for Boomers and Beyond. An invitation for ages 65 and over to consider turning this crisis into a gift, both for ourselves and for the younger generations. Offered by myself, Connie Barlow. Written 17 March 2020, updated April 16th, and my narration here is April 17th. A COVID legacy pledge. Turning fear into calm and crisis into generosity by insisting on palliative care at home and or saying no to ICU medical interventions. So there are 4 sections to what I have online, but it's really only the first 2 that I'm going to concentrate on here. The first, what and why a legacy pledge by seniors? And then the second will be my own sample COVID legacy pledge. What and why a legacy pledge by seniors will have 3 sections to it that I'll be reading here and now. The first is the generational setting, then interpreting the COVID crisis and its stakes, and then finally, taking action. The generational setting. As elders, we know these things. Our role in degrading Earth's biodiversity, well-being, and climate over a half-century or more of adult living, no matter how unintended, is not only horrifying in itself, We also know that there is no way for any of us to fully make amends for the resources each of us has consumed and the pollution thereby released. There's nothing we can do at this late stage to toggle our lifetime legacy measure as ecological takers over to the plus side. And as of March 2020, we can no longer deny that we shall carry onward into the future as economic takers too, as the youngers file for unemployment in the tens of millions. Two terms need some explanation: ecological takers and economic takers. Ecological takers is a term that I first heard used in the novel by Daniel Quinn, Ishmael, which was published in 1992 and got widespread attention. He used that term for those of us in industrial society that are definitely living our lives in ways that are unsustainable. We're reducing the resources, reducing the opportunities, reducing the health of our planet that all future generations of humans and other species are going to have to deal with. So he used the term ecological taker, or just taker societies, in contrast to what he called leaver societies, which is really most of what traditional cultures were before having access to the kind of fossil fuels just ramp up our abilities to be able to create tools, to travel places, to dig for more resources, and so forth. So ecological takers and economic takers are two terms very relevant for right now. Economic takers is what we're seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic, but ecological takers, that's the climate. That's the destruction of the oceans. That's the ozone hole. That's all the pollution. That's the biodiversity loss. That's all the stuff that we've been doing ever since I remember in the early 1970s when I was in college and first woke up to what the word ecology meant and what we were doing to planet Earth. Continuing this background. Here in the USA, many of us receive the blessings of monthly Social Security checks and Medicare health coverage, both of which are financed via FICA, which the younger see face on as a negative in every paycheck they receive or yearly when filing annual tax forms with check enclosed. Yes, the working poor can entirely escape income taxes, but not one dime of fixed FICA taxes at 15.3% for the struggling self-employed. And all those with income anywhere beyond the official poverty threshold have to struggle to line up and pay for their own health insurance, and so often go without. So yes, of course, we seniors feel guilt, and some of us also feel shame, though we try not to. Each of us is, after all, just one body in a generational herd. We didn't know that we were doing anything wrong. Or did we? Can we at least try to recollect when it was that we began actively trying not to know? Stop here for a moment. Try to answer that last question for yourself. Take a few breaths while looking up from this page. And then read on. That was the end of the section, the generational setting. Now, the other background I'm doing today is called Interpreting the COVID Crisis and its Stakes. Let us consider COVID-19 not as threat, but as gift. A gift from Gaia, grace, or God that largely spares the youngers while taking primarily us. Pause for a moment. Just a couple days ago, I got notice that on the Centers for Disease Control site, The tally for deaths thus far in the United States seems to be that the proportion is that 8 out of 10 deaths are of people 65 years old and older. Now, back to the reading. COVID-19 can be interpreted as a gift just for us seniors, for we can contribute to achievement of herd immunity without overtaxing medical staff and facilities, so long as we insist on staying home, no matter what. Crucially, a stay-at-home no matter what pledge should not be taken by any senior who can only do so with sadness or anxiety. I have to emphasize that. This is about us. This is about what we decide. It's not about anybody saying, oh, we should sacrifice our seniors. We can make these decisions for ourselves. We are not sacrificing ourselves. At least that's not the way I feel when I sign my own COVID legacy pledge. So I'll continue reading here. This is what I say about it. Crucially, a stay-at-home no matter what pledge should not be taken by any senior who can only do so with sadness or anxiety. It is not a choice to ascertain while depressed, nor to communicate with anything other than calm, peaceful resolve. Ideally, the choice should be made and communicated days and weeks before any prospect of a possible need for implementation by those trusted and charged to honor it. Terminology is crucial too. No one should be permitted to assume or speak of it as a sacrifice. Rather, we interpret and convey to others that our resolve is nothing more unusual than what our own ancestral elders routinely did in times of crisis. They chose and acted for the good of the whole easily, instinctively, and in ways that felt honorable in their own hearts. I need to emphasize that word, honorable. We don't speak of that enough in our culture. Honorable, honor. That's what we can do as seniors. That's why I wrote this pledge. I'll continue. They chose and acted for the good of the whole easily, instinctively, and in ways that felt honorable in their own hearts. In doing so, their very being emanated a kind of sacred calm that was, in its own way, contagious and thus comforting to others. Indeed, some of us have heard stories or even experienced elders in our own lineages having taken this step. I remember my paternal grandfather taking this step in 1966 and my mother in 1998, the latter with my assistance. In recent years, the explanation given to youngers has necessarily been vague and thus difficult for listeners to accept with grace. I don't want to be a burden. That's what I heard from my mother just out of hospital. But unlike others in the family, I did not contradict her and was in fact honored to serve as her at-home champion and support. Let me pause here for a moment. I'll have a lot more to say, not just about my mother and my paternal grandfather, the experience I had of what they did when it was time for them to go. That's going to come in what I call the prelude to the COVID legacy pledge itself. The prelude, the pledge, and something I call the plea. And so in the sample, I'm going to be speaking of my own understanding, my own family history, and I think that's really important to convey to the family members or friends or whoever it is that will be speaking to doctors about what our medical preferences are, and certainly don't call 911. Don't call 911 if that's what we choose to do. It's very important that we give them the backstory so that they can breathe and go, got it. That's why she felt that way. So important. So, back to finishing that paragraph. I don't want to be a burden, is what I heard from my mother just out of hospital. But unlike others in the family, I did not contradict her and was in fact honored to serve as her at-home champion and support. Now, however, the explanation can be a lot more focused and inarguable. And here are the 3 examples I get of rationale that we can speak quickly for others to hear. Personally, I don't want young people to lose their income and sense of security in order to reduce coronavirus deaths among those of us who have already lived a full life. Another possibility, I don't want to contribute to the physical and emotional overwhelm of doctors and nurses. Wow, that is so big for me now, given what's going on in the news. 10 nurses here in California just a couple days ago were relieved of duty because they stopped. They protested in a hospital because they were not given the kind of masks that they felt necessary for not getting the disease themselves and certainly not spreading it under other patients if they had to wear the same mask in room after room after room. So anyway, that's a big one. It was one I hadn't thought of when I created this pledge. I was only thinking of the younger people and their jobs and their future well-being. It didn't occur to me. The sacrifices and the overwork of the medical staff. That's just so important for me now. So again, I don't want to contribute to the physical and emotional overwhelm of doctors and nurses. And then finally, a third one I've thought of. You may have many others that you think of as well. I want to measure up to what my own ancestral elders would have done in this crisis. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in episode 2. Some of the stories that I experienced and heard about my ancestral elders, that I want to carry on that legacy, and I feel good about doing what's necessary when I've already lived a full life. Continuing on, life conditions and societal times offer today's seniors an opportunity to step forward and do what our own ancestral elders routinely did. They gave of themselves whenever and however their actions could bless the younger generations. And they did not regard such actions as sacrifice. Rather, it was an honor. And it offered them peace in otherwise very trying conditions, which back then was usually famine or plague. For a brief window of time, this newly emerged virus offers each of us an opportunity to make a supreme gift, should we so choose. And we can do so without even stepping out of our homes. Our age group is singularly capable of preventing overshoot of hospital advanced care capacities and of preventing medical staff overwhelm. The Centers for Disease Control in mid-April confirmed our distinctive power to turn the tide. Data thus far attests that 8 out of 10 COVID deaths in the USA are of seniors 65 and up. And of course, I already mentioned that. It's just so close to my consciousness right now. As good citizens, we indeed will stay at home, and some of us will be moved, even elated, to do more. We create and announce our own versions of a self-triage commitment, a COVID legacy pledge. Let me pause here for a moment. I'd like to emphasize the word self-triage. One of my elder friends that I sent my initial draft to mentioned, "Oh, you're talking about self-triage." Consider this. You know, we tend to think, okay, triage, and triage is the term that when a facility or someone on the battlefield is overwhelmed with people who've been hurt, what you first do is give attention to the people who absolutely need it and have a good chance of surviving. You let go for a while the people that can survive on their own until you can give them attention, and you don't attend to the people who probably won't survive even if you attend to them. Triage is something that hospitals can do, but it's individuals who have to make the decisions and implement it. What we do know is that if a senior is, or anyone else is seriously ill and put on a ventilator, it's very rare for that ventilator for a COVID-19 disease to be able to come off within a week, even 2 weeks. And so what that means is if the person is not improving, again, it's their own immune system. We don't have any vaccines or antibiotics or anything that you can give for a virus on this. But if their own immune systems aren't starting to step up, what happens when somebody else new needs that ventilator, especially if there's someone that has better prospects, you got to remove it. You've got to remove it from the person who has it. Who wants to have to do that? If we self-triage, and what I mean by that is nothing more than pledging to stay at home or pledging to not go into ICU if we do end up in hospital. But making that pledge, we may carry through on our own or we may not. But we have made the decision ourselves that because of our age, because we feel we have fully lived, we want others, and especially the youngers, and those who still have kids at home to take care of, we want them to get the advanced care and the medical equipment, not us. So, final paragraph in this section. As good citizens, we indeed will stay at home, and some of us will be moved, even elated, to do more. We create and announce our own versions of a self-triage commitment, a COVID legacy pledge. So we've just finished the second section of this background, interpreting the COVID crisis and stakes. And now the third and final section is taking action. If this possibility makes you smile, and only if that, please, then write your own 3-part pledge, however short or long. Write it in a way that blesses those you will ask to read and honor it. And the 3 parts are Prelude, Pledge, and Plea. The sample pledge below, and that's something that I'm going to be doing in episode 2 for YouTube, the sample pledge below is perhaps an extreme form from this original author, but know that relinquishing nothing more than ICU will greatly support you and thereby our generation in making possible a final gift of immense proportions. Journalists have documented that at least some hospitals are willing to offer transfer to palliative care if a patient or spokesperson for a patient chooses not to agree to induced coma and intubation necessary for hooking one up to a ventilator. Now let me pause there. We've probably all heard of ventilator, and we've heard that there's a problem that there aren't enough ventilators to go around, particularly given how long it takes to wean one off of a ventilator. But what we probably haven't heard is what a doctor has to do before the person goes on the ventilator. They have to be put in a coma so that they're not moving around. And what that means is when you're put in a coma before going on a ventilator is you may not wake up. That means you may die without knowing it. This may be your last understanding, and the last thing you want to have happen is some of the things that's explained in an article that I'll post here in a moment, April 13th in the New York Times. I read this thing aloud, and to my husband, and he and I were both crying as a result. That someone arrives struggling for breath, and they're told, if you go on a ventilator, we have to put you into a coma. We can't guarantee anything coming out of this. And you've got 15 minutes here to find someone to talk to on your phone or my phone. Actually, you have no visitors allowed in the hospital. You can't have a family member. All you can do is maybe FaceTime on a doctor's phone. 15 minutes to say goodbye. This could be the end. Final thoughts. You don't want that. You want to think this through. And if you decide no ventilator in advance, that kind of time component is not going to be thrust upon you at home or in a hospital. So going back, I want to read that last sentence again. Journalists have documented that at least some hospitals are willing to offer transfer to palliative care if a patient or spokesperson for a patient chooses not to agree to induced coma and intubation necessary for hooking one up to a ventilator. This April 13th article in New York Times beautifully lays out the horror of COVID patients having to make this decision quickly, with no opportunity for family to be with them on site and with very poor prospects for ever again gaining consciousness. Isolation in hospital with overworked masked attendants, serving them potentially for weeks until death or debilitated recovery, is what would follow. So I've got that April 13th article in the New York Times linked from this webpage, and I'll show it here now. So again, rereading the final sentence. Isolation in hospital with overworked masked attendants, serving them potentially for weeks until death or debilitated recovery, is what would follow. No one will be there to hold your hand. No one will be there to hold your hand. If so moved, write your own pledge, then mail or email it, and consider having a copy of it present and boldly visible in every room of your home. Again, it doesn't do any good to make the pledge privately to yourself or in your own heart of hearts and not let family members know about it, not assure that your ghost is going to haunt them if they don't follow it. That's a really good thing to say. You've got to make sure it's going to work. And so if 911 happens and you don't want it to happen, you have that on your refrigerator and you have it everywhere, as well as your traditional advance directives. Be prepared that friends and family, especially those who are not themselves seniors, may be incapable of understanding how an elder can create a legacy pledge with equanimity, even joy. Be prepared to hear the retort that you must be depressed and should therefore seek help. Be prepared for the hurt and emotional distancing you may feel as a result. Be prepared as well for politicians and pundits to denounce such an undertaking if it becomes widespread and vocalized. Any kind of legacy pledge, any kind of sense of no 911, no ICU. Be prepared as well for politicians and pundits to denounce such an undertaking if it becomes widespread and vocalized, as encouraging our society to sacrifice its seniors. Yet a self-made pledge has nothing to do with our society imposing any such thing on seniors. Quite the opposite. It is strictly about seniors announcing one by one that they will not passively acquiesce to advanced medical care or burden medical staff with having to make triage decisions for them. That's the key. Rather, it is about seniors taking agency themselves to become fully informed of the implications for self, family, others, and future generations, to reflect deeply on one's own priorities, values, and desired outcomes, and to make one's desires, resolutions known to family, friends, and, when necessary, medical staff. Perhaps, too, by making our desires known, This in itself may help scientists fine-tune their modeling predictions for flattening the curve in ways that release more young people back into the workplace and thus help diminish anxieties of those still in the full working and parenting stages of life. Here, April 17th, many of us have already probably encountered journalists writing about scientists who've used their computer modeling to help the people in charge decide when to start easing up on sequestering at home, when to start offering possibilities for aspects of the economy to come back online. I personally wonder, what are they expecting of us older people? They're getting good statistics now on average, if you're in the ages 60 to 70 and then 70 to 80 and 80 beyond, on each of those age groups and considering underlying conditions we might go in with beyond the COVID, they've got good ideas of our prospects for recovery, death, or how long we'll have to be on a ventilator. They're starting to get that. But are they assuming that we're all going to allow advanced medical interventions when 8 out of 10 deaths to prevent is of us? I think that's important, and that's why I'm hoping with this YouTube video we can get a sense out there that a large increment of seniors are saying, hey, I've already lived a full life. I want to be honorable, as I know or as I assume many of my ancestors were for me, that allowed me to come through childhood because they did what was necessary. I want to make sure our society knows that we're not just going to be passive about whether we're put on a ventilator or not, whether we're even taken into a hospital. We're not going to be passive about it. We're going to make clear that we want comfort care at home and let nature take its course.